Elizabeth Cacavano. I am being recorded now. I am the Northeast Quad Director, and I'm also the liaison, the lucky liaison to Victor for the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force. And I'm really excited for this event. So I'm going to pass it off to our moderators. We have Warda Zeta and then Catherine Chattergoon.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to have all of you here with us tonight. My name is Catherine Chattergoon, and I'm a third-year student in the Bachelor of Architecture program at Pratt Institute.
Hi guys, I'm Warda Zaidi. I am a master's student at Savannah College of Art and Design, and we are so excited to be hosting this webinar today and get this conversation started. And we are joined tonight by three amazing panelists. We have Jati Zunabi, Edson Kebolfin, and Camille Sherrod. And if you guys want to go ahead and give us a brief introduction about yourselves, that would be amazing. And we'll start with you, Jati, and then we'll go to Edson and then Camille.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. My name is Jati. I'm currently a doctoral student at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Shout out to whoever's from IIT there, who's here. I go by he, his pronouns. I graduated from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with my undergrad and my master's. And I also organize with the Designers Protest Collective, as much as organize academically as well with Dark Matter University, two institutions that I believe, not institutions, sorry, organizations that are trying to advocate and engage with anti-racist design justice within our field.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Edson Kebolfin. I use he, him pronouns. I am currently the Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the School of Architecture at Tulane University, where I also concurrently serve as the Director of the Social Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship Program. I am an architectural historian, an architect, a designer, and so my research interests lies at the intersection of architecture history and theory, gender and sexuality studies, post-colonial theory, Southeast Asian studies, among others. And I'm really excited to be part of this conversation.
And hello, everyone. My name is Camille. I am a faculty member at the School of Public Architecture at Kean University here in New Jersey. My official title is I am the Presidential Postdoctoral Fellow, and I've been here for the past 5 years. And so I'm a licensed architect in New York and New Jersey. I also have my own practice in New York, which is called Subterranean Architects. I went to school in a couple of the regions that I think we have represented here tonight. So I went to school in Georgia, I went to school in Michigan, I also went to school in London. And so I'm just really excited to be here with all of you, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight and having this incredibly vital conversation about how and why architectural education has prioritized white male architects and how we can emphasize more representation to create inclusive and comfortable environments for everyone within this profession. So we'll just dive right in and we'll do questions first, and at the very end we'll open the floor up for questions from the audience. So just think of your questions, you can type them in the chat, we'll read them out, whatever you want. So our first question is, what does race have to do with architectural education, and how does architectural education continue to uphold white supremacy? And we can go in whatever order you want. It's up to you guys. I can put someone on spot too. So I'll just say, Edson, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Okay, thank you, Warda. Thank you so much. I'll start off with a statement that I think the reason why race is intertwined with architectural education because all people live, work, and play in architecture and the built environment. Therefore, architecture and the built environment is really ultimately about people, and therefore questions of race and other human dimensions would inevitably be part of it. And so, which means that architecture education, because it's about the kind of designing and training of people to become architects and designers, then therefore race would also then be inevitably be intertwined with it. Quickly, I would say with why white supremacy is still sort of evident and embedded within architectural education. If we use, for example, the ideas by Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones about white supremacy culture, for example, ideas of perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, either or thinking, individualism, we see this still very evident in our architectural education today. For example, striving to get an A in studio, that's an idea related to perfection. Whenever we say that we celebrate the solitary genius, that's about individualism. Defending one's work during a studio critique or review, that's about defensiveness. The need to be objective and not having emotion, that's about objectivity. That our sort of senior project needs to be large, monumental, and iconic. That's related to the idea of progress as being bigger and about more. And then, for example, also the idea of oral histories being ignored. That's about the worship of the written word. These are just some examples of how I think there's white supremacy culture is still embedded in architecture education.
Camille and Jati, do you guys have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think architecture or race and architecture is such a conversation because I think we all know that there's a problem. That when we look around in our communities, when we walk down the street, that we have this intuitive sense that what we see in reality isn't reflexive in the profession. And so I feel like it's such an issue, this issue of race, because we know that something is going on, something's not quite right. And so I think the homogeneity in the profession is really the reason why, we're having conversations about race. I think that's really where it starts.
Last thing I'll just close. I think Edson, or you said it really well. But I mentioned this before to those of us who've been on the grassroots community conference in the summer. First off, I guess I always do this thing where I acknowledge privilege. If I could share my screen, I would share sort of the land acknowledgement slide that I always use in these kind of scenarios. See if I can do this. Can everyone see my screen? So I know that I am in the Illinois Institute of Technology, Southside Chicago, this, that, and the third, but we should also be cognizant of sharing where we are, because I think acknowledgement is the key of all this, right? So even though I am in Southside Chicago, I want to acknowledge that these are the previous tribes who have been sort of displaced from sort of quote unquote ancient history. And then of course, more recently in the mid 20th century, when we talk about Southside Chicago being a key point of displacement for Black and Brown communities, okay? So I'll stop sharing that bit so you can see my face. I'm also very nervous, right? Despite having a vast amount of privilege and wealth, I acknowledge that I come from a very cultivated and engineered family, right? I'll be a third generation doctoral holder. My parents have been well educated. I don't have to go through most of my typical presentations, but I'm not just a student. I'm not just a faculty brushed as a student. I think it's important to understand the power that we have as students as well in these fields, right? In 1969, Whitney Young Jr. Gave his remarks to sort of the AIA group in Oregon, and that spurred, in the height of what we consider to be as the race riots of the United States. we also saw that we failed to memorialize something that really changed the scope of our education system, right? And I'm going to quote verbatim of this book, which again, this is might be like I'm extrapolating or seem like I'm nervous, but I understood the assignment, right? And Victor, who gives me an order, not order, but like shares me these things, I do the assignment. So this book is the seminal work from Joan Achman and Rebecca Williamson, commissioned by the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture. And I always go back to this quote, right? At the AIA's 1970 convention, attendees from the student group ASC/AIA, led by Howard University's Taylor Culver, right? Howard University is a historically Black college and university, seized the podium from AIA president and demanded attention to social problems. The group gained in strength and autonomy over the next decade and a half. Its budget and administrative structure expanded, and it initiated its own publication, Crit, in 1976, I think, which happens to be where I also got my scholarship from. Shout out to you, AIS. Ensuing years, the AIS successfully engaged in advocacy on student matters, notably calling for fair wages of student interns, and through Studio Culture Task Force, kind of like this one, influencing the NAB in 2004 to adopt standards related to studio culture as part of the accreditation process, right? So what I want to go with that is that, who is Taylor Culver? Why hasn't AIS memorialized this Black student from Howard who seized a podium from the AIA convention to bring about acknowledgement that there is a race war about to occur in the United States? We didn't do that last year, right? What happened to the gumption? What happened to the force, the vigor, the venom that we had as students? And I think that that's not, the onus is not on us as younger millennials or even zillennials. It's about the system that's perpetually oppressing us from doing that. How do we seize a Zoom podium apart from Zoom bombing, right? And these are the questions I think that we should answer, you know, maybe not tonight, but like think about it, right? Do I want to co-sign what NAB is doing if I am in a position of power in AIS? Do I want to co-sign what ACSA is trying to do? Because all the works that started as a result of a Black student seizing the podium has elevated AIS to the platform where it is today, right? AIS is not just a student organization. They need to co-sign on everything that NAB and ACSA do. So that's why I think race is not just about architecture education, it's about how we can construct and see how it's also often being relegated to people like us, people brown, Black, who have to do the voiceless work, who have no visibility, right? So that's where I'll end that. Sorry, I get very like, you know, passionate and like I could go on, but I'll let the moderators. Yeah.
Thank you all for those amazing answers to that question. I think you all did a really great job articulating that we're all impacted by this construct of race, and that whiteness and like the white spatial imaginary continue to permeate architecture in the built environment, and therefore kind of permeate like how we teach in architectural education. So why do you think this legacy of whiteness is still being followed through, and why are we not looking at more women or Black architects or Indigenous architects or architects of color, and why is there no space for them in the canon in the way that we teach? I know that was a big question. Camille, do you want to? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. No, I think why it's still an issue, why issues of whiteness still permeate. I would say maybe it ties into what Jati was somewhat getting at when he was talking about history and land acknowledgement. I even wonder when we have these conversations for myself, if we're all up to speed on the history and the terminology of what it is that we're discussing. And so oftentimes when we have these conversations about whiteness and race, it sort of covers a broad range of topics, from white supremacy to racism to diversity. And, you know, perhaps it would even be beneficial to take a step back and really start to define and unpack what some of these terms mean and what the history and what the legacy is. And so perhaps if we all had a sort of historical foundation that we were coming to the conversation with, then I think that perhaps, we could have a conversation that, maybe even we were talking about the same thing. And so I wonder if sometimes we were even talking about the same thing. And so I'm wondering if sort of history and some background education could be a part of it. But then also in terms of why we're not looking at women or why we're not looking at architects of color, I think it perhaps just very simply comes down to the old saying of, you don't know what you don't know, and you're not thinking about what you're not thinking about. And so if, for example, if there was a conversation or if there were issues to be had that involve children, there's so many things that I probably wouldn't be thinking about because, I haven't spent a lot of time around children. I don't have any children. And so I think, or I wonder if that's not part of it. If we have a conversation or we have a space where we're not having diverse voices, sometimes it's perhaps not even out of malice. It's just you're not thinking about what you're not thinking about. And so I wonder if sometimes the voices at the table, they're not even aware of, some of the issues and some of the feelings and some of the hardships that, others are really going through. And so I think it perhaps goes back to the question of history that Jati was talking about, but also, that fundamental question of just getting different perspectives, backgrounds, voices at the table, as part of the conversation just to start.
I'd like to also continue what Camille is saying about the history, because as an architectural historian, that was one of the things that I was reminded of, that the reason why, for example, our architectural education in the US, and in fact, also if you look at it across the world, is that because our current architectural education system is really deeply rooted in European models. The French Beaux-Arts system, that's why you still have terms like the partie, the idea of architectural drawings, the charrette, those are legacies of the Beaux-Arts system. And then we layer that with the German Bauhaus system, and that's where we have our foundational courses right now about basic forms, the progression from 2D to 3D, material exploration. Those are all coming from the Bauhaus system. And then the other layer on top of that is that the American university education system is really coming from the European Enlightenment period idea of education, which really stemmed from the 17th century. That their argument is that it's about focusing on the scientific method, objectivity, rationality, the idea of transmitting it to a wider audience. Those are all enlightenment ideas that if you look at our current architectural education system, you see all of that there. So which means that because the root and the foundation of our university system, of our architectural education is really coming from these European origins, that's why they're still there. And therefore, because those systems were prioritizing white designers, architects, and that those legacies never went away. I'll give you a clear example also how this system also does not only also live within the US. I was born and raised in the Philippines. And so my architectural education, for example, in the Philippines in the 90s, we were studying using textbooks that came from England at that time, because those were the only ones that were available. And we were using Sir Bannister Fletcher's A History of Architecture or the Comparative Method. When we were looking at those textbooks, which emerged from 1896, first published during that time, and then had multiple iterations, Asian architecture, for example, were relegated to non-historical styles. And that somehow only European styles, and then therefore American architecture was kind of at the peak of what was considered as the pinnacle of what is the good and the beautiful of architecture. And these textbooks were used amongst other British Commonwealth countries, for example, like Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, and others as well. And what happens is that then what they were teaching were really about white supremacy, and the kind of prioritization of white architects. No women, as the question, no women, no BIPOC designers. They were all white men. And so I'm also reminded of Linda Nochlin, an art historian, and she wrote in 1971. She said, "Why have there been no great women artists?" Which is like similar to your question today. Is that it's not because there were no women artists, she argued, is that because the game was rigged for women to not be able to participate. They were kept out of the schools. So how can they even produce the art to be able to compete? It was not even a level playing field. So similarly, that's also what's happening, is that because the game was rigged for the white Europeans to dominate, and therefore BIPOC, for example, women, queer designers are not able to participate because they were not included in those rules, and that it was biased against them. So that's what I see as kind of why this kind of legacies of white prioritization, and why we're not even looking at BIPOC architects and designers, is because of the structure itself of education. The structure itself of our universities is so much embedded in those ideas that prioritize the white straight male, basically.
And to bounce off of that, I think it's very important here that let's just keep it real funky. All right, let's keep it real funky. Edson is not just an associate dean. He has a doctoral degree from Cornell. He had to do a master's of science, which let's a little back behind the curtain things. If a school makes you do a master's of science before you do a PhD, that's just colonial abstraction of your wealth. It literally just wants like, oh, we don't know whether you're good enough, right? Why does Edson have to have a boss when he has a doctoral degree? Why does he have to have a boss that's from Catalonia? Who I'll get to this point, because if we're going to do game recognized games, but Camille has an M.Arch from AA from London. Like how does that? How have we shadowed, all these brilliant minds who come from great schools, who have knowledge and power in terms of their own right, but it is only after a Black man gets murdered in the streets and that it's recorded and is given light of day that we start to think about these things, right? So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Again, little extents to those of us who I'm hoping that Edson can bring context to this, and it's the reason why I'm curating this very carefully. I'm not trying to get him in trouble. So this is a wonderful site called Too White School for Architecture. And it's interesting because Chris, who helped start this, was doing this kind of the same way I did it towards my own school. And the idea is that this whiteness, this white hegemony is perpetuate and incessant till today, right? And we all know big architects. I love how he sometimes does this, like, to my surprise, this photo has turned out to be deeply offensive to a lot of people who appear to believe that we have chosen each other based on factors utterly indifferent as gender and race rather than our shared passion, talent, skill, blah, 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 blah. Seriously? Okay, my guy, you are so problematic. And I don't care if he ever sees this. Who does it matter to, right? It's the ignorance. It's the ignorance and the lack of visibility, right? And I think that if you curate through Too White School of Architecture, and again, I hope that Edson can bring more context to this, because Chris does a good job in curating some of the very interesting things about how this school is problematic. And I'm not saying that to come at Tulane, right? Because Tulane did put out a very interesting equity diversity statement. But I question that sometimes when you have to lean on your daughter and your wife, right? Why do you have to lean on Black and brown people? Why do you have to lean that in your statements? The report is great, and I hope Edson can speak more about that, but I think it might predate him and his position starting at Tulane. But this is my school, right? As a PhD student, I had to bring my own funding. And yet this is their recent visitation report, completely redacted. It's a private school, right? But where is the differential and understanding of like international students, people of color do not have the generational wealth that some of them do have, right? Like me, I come from, as people might have realized, I'm Malaysian, and the Commonwealth has privileged some people in Malaysia to be able to have opportunities to study abroad. The reason I always mention my family is because we are smart, but we have some money, not a lot, right? So the idea here is that it's still prevalent today, because this report was done in the fall of 2021, right? It was issued out, and yet they are still redacting all the financial responsibilities. How are you going to have this and then have literally 2 positions out here and tell someone like me or tell students that we don't have money, anymore, right? So it's to answer the question, why is there such a wide prioritization, is because it's capitalistic. It's about the dollar money at the end, right? And I'm gonna turn off the share screen. It's literally the dollar money and the fact that we don't have a maternalistic viewpoint that we should have when it comes to education. Because outside the United States, education is not just on par with the Pope, but it's on par with a sacred scholastic sanctuary that you cannot just bastardize with market value. So I think.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you bringing in that capitalistic context, Jati, because it's a very impressive system in which we all operate under. And Camille, you bringing in the historical context is also very important. And you, Edson, bringing in the understanding of how the institutions that we have today have formed. So how do you think that we can start to, personally and both systematically and systemically break away from this Eurocentric model that kind of rules architectural education today, and start creating new knowledge frameworks on which to teach and construct architecture? And how do you all start to implement this in your own practice, in your own education, within your own spheres of influence?
Well, I guess, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
No, maybe just quickly, just in line with what Jati was saying about, the capitalist American society that we all sort of find ourselves in right now. I mean, I think that, or understanding that situation, may be a good place to start. And I say that in part of someone who, did go to university in the UK, that I think that there's great opportunity for you all as students, because America is, as Jati mentioned, a capitalist society. And because of that, it is a sort of customer-centric society. And I think understanding as students your role in the system, that within a university, you are the customers. And within our society, you really have the power, more so than we do, I would say, as educators or as faculty or as administrators. I think the students, really have a substantial amount of power. And so I would say, for all of the students to, start to have these conversations even amongst yourselves, and even just start to realize that, you have a lot more power than, perhaps you at times really realize.
I just want to thank you, Camille, because that is very true. Someone who, I think that's really cool that 3 of us have had experiences elsewhere. Only in the United States does this capitalistic system work for students, because we had the bag. We literally have the cornerstone that keeps our institutions on edge. I'm going to share my screen I keep saying I have to share my screen a little bit, but in Illinois, specifically Urbana-Champaign, has this problem where they're reliant on international students to support their funding. In this article here, Fading Beacon by APM reports in conjunction with the Chronicle of Higher Education, there was a huge investigation done in which international students not only helped hold tuition down and make up for lost state support, right? For those of us in the know in Chicago, all the revenue that the state kind of gets has to go to, and this is a very bastardization of my perception of it, but it's going to the fire department to pay off the retirement plans because everyone is retiring so quickly and so forth. But anyway, the problem is the state does not have money. So not only are international students providing a financial windfall for college towns and the American economy as a whole, the US Department of Commerce estimates that international students' financial impact is $44 billion a year. So put that in perspective. I have been in school for almost 3 degrees now. My brother went and did 1. My parents did, went to school here. Edson did 3 as well. And yet we have no more say than any other faculty in trying to change the system in this capitalistic view. But who does? It's the students. And I've always said this from the get-go. I refuse to want to be a faculty, not because of like some ghost thing that my parents have, oh, you're eventually going to become an educator. No, I think it's because students have more power in the United States than any other continent. And it's so poignantly obvious that capitalism is trying so hard to break that. And I really encourage everyone to say, hey, if I decide to convince not just myself or a cohort of people to just like take a gap year, schools will lose out money, right? Because the states aren't supporting them. It's international students and literally your money that are keeping schools alive. So students have more power than faculty. Now, of course, we will always try to fight back as administrators and as faculties with grades, some terrible letter, like a meeting, but you have to fight back against that. Don't feel ashamed. Always have someone with you, and your grade is not going to be the end all of your career. I will be the first one to say that, because look where I am today.
Yeah, and I think also, just as faculty members, I think it can be a little bit tough. And I think sometimes perhaps it's worth keeping in mind that, not all faculty members are in the same position. And so sometimes you have tenure track faculty positions that don't necessarily have the standing within the institution, or pre-tenure track faculty members that don't have the standing in the institution that they could really bring about change. And so I think that perhaps that's another reason for students to really even seek out faculty members to self-initiate. One of the things that we did last year at Michael Graves College was we had a series of events that was called Black in Interior Design. And that was really just an opportunity to have a space for Black students. And what we were finding is that it was the Black male students who were dropping out at a higher proportion than any other demographic. And so as faculty members and faculty that are, in tenure track, we can't necessarily make broad sweeping administrative change all the time. But what we can do is things like, be an advocate for our students and, hold space and give support. So, just to mention that.
I think like one of the things also that both Jati and Camille had also pointed out that I'm also thinking about is the kind of change that happens in multiple levels, personal, the kind of within a community, within the institution, and how like I see that there needs to happen like different types of change, for example, to be able to, let's say, challenge the European-centric model. So for example, on a personal level, as a teacher, as an educator, what I've done is that then like because I'm teaching my course, so which means like I have the accountability of my course. And so I changed my syllabus directly. For example, I used to teach a course for more than 9 years at the University of Cincinnati before I was at Tulane. I was teaching a course called Human Dimension of Space. And what I did was that then I included a more diverse set of voices within the examples that I use, right? So which means that I only don't talk about, yes, I can talk about Bjarke Ingels. Yes, I can talk about Michael Graves, right? Definitely, right? And I also then talked about, let's say, an architect from the Philippines, who did work on working with informal settlements. And also I talked about, let's say, an architect from Singapore, and others, So which means that the examples that I was also trying to show is that then they were not simply limited to the kind of ideas and examples that we had sort of been taught before. And for me, that's also like one of the kind of like faculty can do, a kind of on a personal level and the level of the course, and then I think you can sort of like expand, right? Like you can expand also. For example, we started also discussing about decolonizing the curriculum. And I know this is also a conversation that's happening also in many institutions across, not only in architecture, but also in different fields and disciplines. Because there is, I do agree and I do believe that there is a need to look at if, as I was saying before, if our institution itself is embedded in this enlightened idea of enlightenment, it's very Eurocentric, it's based on ideas of it's related to colonialism, then if we don't kind of challenge those systems, then nothing is going to change. So and that's kind of the discussion about change at a structural level and kind of like an institutional level. So like relating to what Jati and Camille are saying, then also is that then we all need to kind of like work together to have those change happen in kind of those multiple levels to be able to then really then eventually dismantle, and for me, like that's kind of like the hope is that we'll be able to dismantle these systems, these very oppressive systems, and maybe find a different way. And I do believe we can, like find a different way of then maybe educating architects and designers in the future.
Thank you guys so much for those thoughts. Oh, so sorry. Go ahead.
No. I always had to thank you for, because I'm young, right, quote unquote, in this grand scheme of things. So thank you for Camille who checked me on that, because yes, students actually have a lot more power, but it's also incumbent on us to forgive our professors when they mess up. I was about to use the F word and say F up, but mess up, right? And I think it's very important just to acknowledge that. I have messed up throughout the semester teaching in person for the first time, but at the same time, I know that it is also the unlearning whiteness is not just in classrooms, it's also at home. So if I have a student from the burbs in Southside in Western Chicago telling I'm messing up versus someone who knows that I'm trying to get away from crappy internet and teach here in my office, like, okay, the student needs to learn that it is their whiteness that's imposing a Eurocentric way of looking at a professor or, a course instructor. Forgive your professors, but push back as much as you can. Is what I would say in this liminal space between being a student but also being an instructor, right? Be able to forgive. I'm also learning that. I still have beef with Cruz Garcia, not Natalie Frankowski, but Cruz. But I've honestly, like, it is how do we learn to forgive our professors who harmed us? It's the greatest achievement, higher than a PhD, that I can think of in architecture education that tries to decouple from whiteness, because white people don't forgive. They have this imperial vengeance kind of vibe, which, I don't know, goes back to the June conversation we had at the beginning of this.
I think it's also perhaps to the point of change happening at different levels, perhaps it's also thinking about it as different conversations that need to happen amongst different populations. So when I see the Bjarke Ingels group, I think to myself that, there are conversations amongst white men in the profession that they need to have simultaneously as we're having all of these other conversations. And so I think that, perhaps that's also a part of it, that there are multiple conversations that are happening, across groups, within groups, that are, all a part of, what we're ultimately we're trying to achieve.
Thank you guys so much for those thoughts, and for giving us, the students, the power to, push and challenge our professors, but also, like Jati said, like, be able to forgive as well. At the end of the day, like, I know everyone is trying to be their best self, right? And trying to advocate for a better future, in whatever way they can. But Edson touched upon this, a couple of examples that he implements in his classroom on how he incorporates inclusivity within his teaching style. So I just wanted to get some examples from you, Jati and Camille, as well. And this will be our last question before we open the floor up to the audience. So if you just want to go ahead and give us some examples on how you really strive to incorporate that into your classrooms, that'd be appreciated.
I want to let Camille go because I'm fresh in teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say in terms of in the classroom, I try to keep things as open and flexible as possible. And so while in studio, for example, we have a design brief, I try to structure things in a way where the objectives are clear, but the way that students sort of pursue that is a little bit open-minded. And so I try to allow for students to bring to the table the references that they choose, the techniques, the approaches, the tools, the experiences, the interests that they authentically have. And so I try to structure things in a way where it's as open-minded and flexible and accommodating as I think I can be. And I definitely look to students for their feedback. And I think one of the things that, since perhaps this is a large audience of students, I think one of the best things that you can perhaps offer to your professors is to really take part of the end of semester evaluations as an opportunity to make suggestions, to give and provide feedback. And so again, we try our best, at least I do, to be as inclusive as possible in the classroom, but really, we look for your feedback as well in terms of the best ways that we can do it. And so again, just trying to structure things as open and flexible to interpretation as possible.
Yeah, I hope one day I can be as when I respond to this, I always have to figure it out. But I hope one day I can be like Camille in a good way articulating that. For me, all I do is if I'm taking notes, right? If I take notes of the lecture, for me, because it's a survey class, right? Teaching architecture history is so reductive sometimes. And I say this with the door closed and it's 7:46 Central Time. But what is important for what I think in a classroom, specifically if you're teaching in person in a big lecture hall, even if it's like 55 students, is to just take a vibe check. If everyone is dying a studio, I personally got in trouble because I went up to the other studio professor and was like, yo, you need to stop with this. And then the dean got at me and said, whatever. I'm probably dirty. I'm showing the dirty laundry of IIT here. But what I do is I do the vibe check, if everyone doesn't feel like they're having a great day in the morning, I will try to condense the material, have it be accessible for them later on. But as long as we keep it kosher between each other in terms of I have to fulfill certain things because boy has to eat and you have to fulfill certain things so I can give you that grade so you can get to this level, right? That's then we have a mutual understanding. Because right now we're operating in a capitalist kind of framework, but I will try my best to advocate for my students. I hate calling it my students, they're just people who are just trying to make it, right? So I'll just say the comrades just need a break sometimes, and I'll be like, all right, instead of doing a group activity, let's just me go over the material real quick in about 15 minutes, and we'll dismiss class early, things like that. Or, you know, sometimes we'll just go outside. It's easier that way. But those are just like minute things that you can control within your own environment. But in terms of when I do hit the whole like, oh, tenure track professor or an admin or even associate dean, sure, things might be a little drastic, but for now, for the better or worse, I have limited power, but when the power that I do have, I cede it back to the people because they're the ones paying me. So I always have that in mind.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your answers and responses. I am going to open the floor up to our audience members. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourselves, or you can type in your question in the chat and Catherine or I will read them off. But yeah, the floor is yours, guys.
I have a
Okay.
Oh.
Oh, you go.
So I believe all three of our panelists today are a part of Dark Matter University. So I'm just curious if you all could tell us a little bit more about Dark Matter University and kind of what your experience has been being a part of that.
Well, so as one of the core members of Dark Matter University, as an organization, we try to strive to not just be an othering. We'd like to invite everyone here to be part of Dark Matter University because everyone here has agency in trying to decouple systemic whiteness in our education system. So I understand what that the question is about, but to just put it plainly, Dark Matter University is an opportunity / collective of people who don't really get with the colonial vibe, and so we try to like while out in certain things that we can within our framework in our schools. So I know I'm still a young professor in the making, but I have gotten in trouble for being too wild and out, but at the same time, I've also gotten opportunities. So that's my experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say my experience has really been refreshing because I think oftentimes you could be in an environment or in a space where you feel a bit isolated, where you feel like you're the only one. And I think it's, just really refreshing to be aware of the fact that there is someone else, whether they're in another school, another city, somewhere across the country, that there is a community and there are other people that, have similar thoughts and experiences and people that want to have a similar conversation. And so I think for me, that's been my experience of DMU. And I would say, for that alone, it could be definitely worthwhile to sort of get involved or even just reach out and, see who, may be having, similar interest or may want to have a conversation. So I think the community has really been quite refreshing.
I can't really speak so much about Dark Matter University because I'm fairly new. But what I'm also hoping, like what Camille was saying, is that the reason why I also wanted to be part of DMU is that because I'm really wanting to create, like as Camille is saying, the kind of collaboration across institutions. That's what I'm hoping to be able to do. And so which is what Dark Matter University has been doing. I've really been impressed with studios that have been offered across different institutions. And so that's what I'm also looking forward. So maybe Camille, Jati, we can collaborate on something. And I think that's what's, I like what Camille is saying. That's what I find really refreshing also with with this organization because of how institutions are structured, and it's just much more difficult to do it. Like what Jati was talking about, like the money, there's a lot of those complicated things. And I think what Dark Matter University is doing is that it's able to cross those boundaries and not really be limited, by those kinds of bureaucratic sort of issues. So personally, that's what I'm trying to and looking forward to in participating with DMU.
Yeah, that was, I think that I'm down to collab, always down. What I was gonna respond to the question about what are some things we can do. And this is just from my experience and also how I've organized in the past. There are multiple ways. I think Edson framed it right? Like it starts from the personal to your community, to the department, to the college. But just brass tacks, there is a provision in NAB accreditation in a lot of these schools. It's called Section 9, and it's like the drastic thing that a lot of people don't share around. And from my research in conjunction with Designers Protests, a lot of people have never invoked Section 9, which is if you write to the NAB president in the next cycle of their visitation report, they have to address all the complaints that has been sent to the president. So if you just type or have the list or something of all the things, the microaggressions, or even just the minutia of like, well, this professor decided to hold studio reviews for like 7 hours, and even though I have to go pick up my brother who doesn't have transportation and I'm the only one with the car and things like that. Or if the dean decides to put in like, we're not going to open the studios 24/7 because people are sleeping in it, even though students might not have a safe home environment to do work. Just write all those down, whether or not it's in a letter format, and then use that and send it to NAB, because by their own definition, they have to respond to that. What are some other ways? Make friends with your new professors, your young professors who are young-minded, not just young in terms of age, and let them give you a little insight into the departmental, not goss, but just the hot tea that's going on, because there are some people who are woke, who are trying to enact changes, but they're either, like falling short or not really open to change, but they're kind of performative, right? So find the people who actually do put their job on the line and get in trouble with the dean just because a kid's dying in classrooms. And then the last thing I could just say is just be authentic, be you, but think of others when you're being you. So, yeah.
And I would say, maybe just to quickly touch upon what Jati was saying in terms of faculty members, I would say absolutely reach out, but also just to sort of put your interest out there, and you never know what opportunities they may arise. And so, for example, there was a student who contacted me, maybe it was like May, June, and just mentioned that, she was looking for an internship and a job, and this is what she was kind of interested in, and if I knew of any opportunities. And, I was able to write a proposal to the university to get some internal funding in order to fund a project for her to lead. And so I would say, just, find, to Jati's point, the approachable faculty members and, put it out there, what you're interested in. You never know what opportunities may arise. And then also, maybe what could be beneficial is to maybe even look over on all of your course syllabi, the student learning objectives, and then also the NAB criteria, and maybe identify opportunities to meet the course requirements in a way that might better align with your interests. And so oftentimes, when I sort of look at the NAB criteria or look at specific learning objectives, that doesn't necessarily need to be fulfilled in a very limited or rigid way. And again, there may be faculty members that can do something about that, or even open to doing something about that. And there may be faculty members who aren't. But I think, one thing that, may be worth giving a try is to, again, really look at your syllabi and sort of see if there are opportunities for you to, take it in a direction that might be more aligned with, who you are as an individual.
To add to Jati and Camille's points about what you can do, I always advise my students who, and in the past they have come to me, for example, like exactly like reaching out and then asking the same questions. What I've always advised to them is that, like what Jati was saying, is that students have the power. And I would say, like, demand it from your administrators, demand it from your faculty. And I think that's what had shown us, with summer, with the Black Lives Matter movement and what had happened in summer of 2020, is that then university presidents, deans, and so on were actually listening once students were beginning to demand it from the universities. And that really goes to show the power of the collective. So if, let's say, I would, and I've seen this with some of my students before who had also challenges and issues. If you had issues about your faculty, talk to your faculty first, right? Because you have to give them a chance to be able to respond to what you need for them to do. If they're not responding, go to the next level, go to the department chair and tell them what's going on. If it's not happening, go to the dean. If it's still not happening, go up and up to the president, right? And even like what Jati was saying, then go to NAB and kind of like higher authorities. What that is showing is that then you have the power to be able to demand the change. And so, which means that you need to also then, if you're not doing it by yourself, also do it together with others, band together as a collective and then make the demand. And I think that's exactly what had happened with the groups coming together, student groups. NOMAS, for example, came out with demands, which was really great because then the deans and then kind of the presidents actually listened to that, right? Now, of course, they're varying response. However, I think what's still very important to point is that then if it weren't for those letters, for those demands, then some of those issues would not really be either those administrators would not pay attention to or would not even realize that it was happening. So please say something and demand it from the authorities and for people in power.
Awesome. Okay, so we have two more questions. We'll take Lillian's and then we'll do Kenneth's. He actually sent a question in the chat, but Lillian, go ahead.
Alrighty, so thank you all for your time and your advice and wisdom. I'm endlessly grateful as just like a white person to be able to get this information from you, especially like, just thank you. I think one of the biggest things that I've come across in dealing with my whiteness and confronting it in an educational format is the hypocrisy that's present in the white community surrounding race, especially in lieu of all of the events. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, so I was like right there when everything happened with George Floyd. And I think one of my questions for you all is how you've seen kind of the higher ups in education and especially in architecture deal with racism and how you've kind of experienced either success in that or tokenization of yourself or other BIPOC people, and like just how can we as white people check ourselves and not kind of rely on Black people and BIPOC in general to kind of guide us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being brave. And like we should always acknowledge when someone's being vulnerable and talking through what they're doing, because I think that that's the difference between a lot of paternalistic views and like what we're trying to cultivate, which is multi perspectives and maternalistic vibes. To the point of how do we check? Honestly, it's that conversation that Camille was talking, or I think it was mentioned in here, leading to Kenneth's question, but I'll answer yours. It's that old buddy kind of thing, right? Sometimes I am not in those things, right? And even they don't have to be white, to be quite honest. They can be affluent, high-powered Chicagoans who have a certain twang or vibe to them that showcases that they have the idea of wearing a cufflink, right? I'm dressed like this because that's just my drip, but I don't exude the suit kind of guy. I'm far from. And I think that acknowledging that just because you are white doesn't mean you can't enact actual visceral change to combating whiteness. It's the same idea that just because I'm brown or black does not mean that I am also harming my community. Because it is oftentimes that silence or that I ain't trying to make it messy, kind of like, all right, is that perpetuate harm, right? So, and a lot of times we in schools, we don't want to speak out because A, it's a professor, or B, it's my friend. Nah, as Edson say, just like say say shit. You know what I'm saying? Just say shit. So
Yeah, I would say, Lillian, I would ask you, and I think you would probably have a better answer than, you know, I could ever come up with. And I think it sort of reminds me of the conversations that we have at times of like toxic masculinity. And I always think that, you know, boys learn a greater lesson of how to be men from other men. And so I think that white architects like yourself are going to really lead the conversation amongst other white architects, more so than, you know, anything, you know, perhaps that I could say or I could come up with, or any event, you know, involving, you know, others. And so I would say to you, Lillian, that I think that, you know, you may, you know, really be a leading voice in that conversation.
For me, I think what I would advise is it's to just ask. You know, just ask a BIPOC student, a BIPOC faculty, how are they? You know, and being, you know, being a brown, a queer brown person, you know, in the US, and I wish that people would just ask me, and because there were so many situations where they just assumed that this is what I need, or they assumed that this is what I'm thinking or I'm feeling, and they were talking to other people about me, and I said, like, why don't you just ask me? I will tell you exactly what I need and how I feel, right? Just ask. And then I think related to that, and then in companion with that, I think also listen. Listen to what others are saying. Listen to what, let's say, BIPOC, the BIPOC community is saying. And because it's also not homogenous, right? Like we cannot also generalize that the BIPOC community is just one homogenous entity. It's not, right? We have all different lived experiences. And so therefore, you need to also ask those people, let's say, the people who might be affected, to just also listen to what they're saying, right? So it's kind of like a give and take, and a combination of asking and listening.
Amazing. Okay, and then we'll take our last question, which was from Kenneth. I can read it off super quickly. And he basically talks about not being able to, you know, be exposed to racism, ableism, sexism within architecture, and the faults within his own teaching system. So how do you propose that other schools and students get exposed if their faculty members aren't advocating for them?
I guess to pay homage to the system, right? Like when I was sharing this earlier, maybe real quick. Yeah, clearly the schools are trying real hard to hire mad people because a lot of people realize, oh, it's hard to relate to these things if you don't have representation. So schools are trying to do that, but that sounds very dismissive. I don't want to sound dismissive because it's real true. Virginia Tech was blessed by Cruz and Natalie, to be quite frank. Virginia Tech did great with hiring Cruz and Natalie's because why think tank has this perpetual saged kind of ways of like decoupling institutions from their normative practices, because that's what they did with my university and the University of Nebraska, and I'm very grateful for them for being able to do that at my school when I was a grad student. But to reach out is easier said than done. So I would just reach out to your friends who have divergent experiences, because there's actually more talent around you than meets the eye, right? If you always are seeking these different like hotshot people, like I realize that I'm accumulating clout by having these kind of things. Don't try to go for clout. Go for people who are just genuinely there, who help you in any person. It could be that roommate who literally is failing, but you know what? They help you with your French Express making coffee one day. It literally is someone around you who has divergent experiences. Could be white, could be any color. Because honestly, their experiences has just been marginalized because of the hierarchy of academia. If I didn't have this title of doctoral student at IIT, I guarantee you people will not see this as like, oh, cool, right? So just find people who have real experiences. It doesn't have to be academic experiences. It can just be exposing to real life. I found sage wisdoms on a bus all the time.
Yeah, and I would say maybe also in addition to that, Kenneth, is you may want to even just start by looking outside of the School of Architecture. And so there may not be someone within your specific school or specific department that's advocating, but there may be someone across campus or someone at the larger university who is advocating. And so your university, may have dozens or hundreds of student organizations. They may have, dozens or hundreds of faculty members. And so, perhaps the first step could even be looking at the larger university and seeing who may be advocating. But then also, I think, a good first step is even what you've done tonight, which is, coming to a conversation like this with students across the Northeast and perhaps beyond. And so I think, being aware of opportunities like this, which are hosted by AIAS, I think is a great opportunity, because, we have a platform of dozens of people, even in this virtual space, who are advocating or who are interested in this conversation. So
I echo what Camille was also saying, that precisely, Kenneth, I think this is like a good step, because then you are reaching out and also taking your initiative to also then learn more. What I would add is that then what I think, similar to what I had said earlier, is that demand it. Ask your dean, and ask your faculty to hire more people who are able to advocate for and be able to talk about this, and who might have the expertise. If let's say you're not finding that expertise, and tell them that this is important to you, this is important to students, this is something that you want to learn about. And therefore, just like what Jati was saying, like the reason why some of these new positions are up is like part of this sort of larger movement about wanting representation in faculty. And then you, as students, for example, you have the voice to tell them, like, I want to learn about how ableism happens in architecture or whatever, or something, or how does queer identity sort of get embedded within our spaces, and that would be a good way. It's like, I think you should also demand it, because frankly, they don't know. They really don't know, again, that's kind of like how pervasive it is. Like, they don't know what you also want, and they also don't know what is probably missing. And so, and I'm not saying also to kind of like take all of the burden, right? You shouldn't also be doing all of this work. But I guess like what I'm also saying is that then this can also be part of a larger way to be able to then, again, just like what we have all been saying, to have all of these changes happening at different levels.
Well said, Edson. Thank you for, demand it. Just demand it. Because ultimately you're the customer. But, be responsible.
Um, all right. So thank you guys. Thank you to our panelists for an amazing conversation. I know we had so many more questions that we wanted to get to, but this is a conversation, an ongoing conversation, and I know we'll have more webinars and more dialogues like this. So thank you so much. And I'm gonna pass it off to Victor for our closing remarks.
Y'all hear me? My Zoom is glitching. Okay, cool. So yeah, just reiterating what Warda was saying, thank you all so much for joining us in the webinar. This conversation was really amazing, and I'm sure everybody took away at least something from tonight's webinar. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And everybody be on the lookout for the next webinar, because these will be ongoing. We will continue these conversations, and we will continue bringing people into these conversations with the AIAS. So thank you again, everybody, for attending.
Thank you for inviting us, me.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for attending, and absolutely feel free to reach out at any time. I posted my email in the chat, and let's keep the conversation going, whether it's through AIAS, through DMU, or some other avenue or channel. And so thank you all, and great conversation.
Thank you, AIAS, and please, I'm really happy that you're having this conversation. So please continue this, and please continue sort of having more people talk about this. So I really commend that you're doing this. So thank you so much for inviting all of us.
Thank you, Booze. Thank you, little pets. Thank for anyone who's the auxiliary who's helping you get here. Thank them as well. So it's almost November. And congrats, Victor and Warda and the whole team, gang. It's not easy to do this pro bono. So
yeah, thank you, JEDI Task Force. Y'all did really amazing putting this together.
Yeah, tonight was fantastic, everybody. So thanks from Scott and I. Yeah.
Y'all from DC.
Have a nice night, everyone.
Everybody.
Have a good night.
I just want to say good job. We got through the first one. Yay.
Thank you. Your graphics were fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
No problem. I enjoyed working on it, and I enjoyed the conversation. Loved it, honestly. You should see my notes right now. I got a sketchbook full of them. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, same. I was trying to take so many notes. I'll have to watch back possibly.
Yeah. I'm just copying a couple of things from the chat onto my notes before I head out, which is why I'm still stuck here.
Yeah, and I'll message the Slack channel too, because my Zoom is glitching super bad right now. I can't even see what has been said in the chat, so I would love to see those notes at some point.
I could copy them all over into a Google Doc and just send it to you.
Yeah, my Zoom, I can't see. I could just see you, but nothing else. It's super weird.
But you could hear, right?
Yeah, I could hear, which is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
You'll be able to see Jesse messaging me say, hey, this is great. Okay.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Do you want to just hop over to Google Meet?
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I could close out of this. So I should be good.
Okay.
I'll join you on there.